Warning, this podcast has stories of real-life events and true crime that happens every day. These stories may contain adult language and graphic or disturbing details not suitable for everyone. Listener discretion is advised.
132 in Bush, I've got him at gunpoint. Check your left phone, we're going to pull that direction on your side.
They're pulling them out.
10-1-1. Advise ready for camp.
God!
Welcome to another episode of War Stories. I am Tom.
And I'm Chuck.
This is weird because I can't hear my voice in the headphones. I'm just talking into the room because I don't have a mic right now because I'm not in my normal studio.
It's okay. You're not blowing me out.
Oh, good. Well, I adjusted some settings, so let's hope that that's working.
Yeah.
Shoot, dude, we're back. And for the most part, I think with the exception of a few hiccups, our going live when we drop an episode has been working. I think we went live without dropping an episode one time. And that was because I was in California and I scheduled it incorrectly. And I didn't have my stuff with me to fix it. And trying to fix a podcast from your cell phone I'm just telling you, it's not great as an option.
Yeah. Too bad we're not neighbors anymore.
I know, right? It would be so much better. Well, you could always, I mean, if you weren't going to Utah, we could be neighbors again. And you've been up here to visit. And I know
crazy thing is it'll only be 40. Crazy thing is it'll only be 45 minutes from Utah, or not Utah, from Idaho, just not the Idaho that you're in.
Yeah, South Idaho.
South. Yeah.
Southern Idaho.
Yeah.
So, well, anyway, so this week we have a guest, and basically you've got the intro, so why don't you talk a little bit about?
Yeah, well, we have Thomas Chittum. Thomas Chittum is a retired ATF associate deputy director. I think that is probably one of the highest guests we've had on in law enforcement. We've had chiefs and stuff.
We've had a chief.
Yeah.
We've had a light colonel, right? Yeah. And now we've had an associate deputy director. I'm curious about what associate part of the deputy director is. So we'll have to get clarification on that. And because when you get to the federal level, some of those ranks are way different.
Right. And he's also an attorney and advisor on matters of justice. Currently.
I'm going to tell you right now, man, I wish I had it to do over. Welcome to our show, Tom. This is Tom. Should we call me Thomas for the time being, or...
Sure, we'll call you Thomas and we'll call him Tom.
Right. I'll tell you,
Thanks for having me on.
Oh, we're happy to. Do you always go by Tom, or did you go by something else and then law enforcement made you into a Tom?
No, Tom has, I've always gone by Tom. I signed Thomas as my official name, of course. But no, everybody who knows me calls me Tom.
Yeah, I was not Tom until I became a police officer, and I had introduced myself by my full name my entire life. And then no matter what you do, at least at a police department, if you introduce yourself as Robert, you're Bob. If you introduce yourself as Thomas, you're Tom. If you introduce yourself as Daniel, you're Dan, right? You introduce yourself as Charles, you're Chuck. So
I was never one of those guys that merited a cool nickname. Every once in a while somebody gets a nickname and it really sticks for them, and I've always just been plain old Tom.
My buddy Jose, his nickname was Dan. It was the funniest thing ever. And so it's just this big Hispanic dude walking around with the name of Dan, and he went by Dan, and we called him Dan. Everyone called him Dan, and every time we'd go get food, he would use Dan, or he'd use some other crazy ass name. And then I got the nickname of Bronson just randomly out of nowhere. And it wasn't random, but it's carefully picked by a gunnery sergeant.
Because you look like that murderer in England. That's why.
Murder. He never murdered anybody. He was just the most prolific prisoner in England.
What do you mean? Didn't he kill people in prison?
What happens in prison stays in prison. But on the outside, what caused him to go to prison was nonsense. It was just crazy stuff. Like, it was just nothing. And they just kept him there because he was so violent and he was crazy.
Well, yeah. I mean, there you go. But we're not here to talk about that,
No.
Chuck Bronson. We're here to talk about is it Associate Deputy Director of the ATF, Tom?
That's
Did I
right.
get that right?
You
Okay.
did. So
Tell us what that means.
Well, you have to understand some of the politics to ATF to understand some of that. But you flatter me when you talk about my rank, but I will tell you, no one was more surprised than me that I got to the level I did in ATF, because I never stopped feeling like a plain old agent. We can talk a little bit about what decision making went into pursuing promotion through ATF. But so ATF is in a difficult position. It serves as a convenient political symbol of a divisive issue. And a lot of the topics don't really relate to what ATF does day to day. In 2006, I think, the law was changed to require ATF's director be Senate confirmed. And for almost all of the time since then, ATF has not had a confirmed director. Twice now it has had confirmed directors. B. Todd Jones, a U.S. attorney out of Minnesota, was confirmed for a couple of years. And under the prior administration, Steve Dettelbach was confirmed for a couple of years. But in all of the other time, ATF has been led by acting directors. And what that means is very often the official deputy director of ATF is acting as the director. And so the person who would be third in charge, if there was a director, steps into that position. And so that associate deputy director position is functionally the deputy director, but it was created that way to be able to accommodate interim assignments of people who have been detailed to ATF in an acting director capacity. It's really kind of a mess. And it's unfortunate because the agency does such incredibly important work that it really should merit some stable leadership. There are pros and cons to having a political director. Anyways, that's another topic. But to your question, associate deputy director was just the deputy director while I was there. So I was the number 2 in charge of the agency at the time.
Whoa! Wow. Okay. And what years? What years?
So I retired from ATF in May of 2022. So I've been retired a little over 3 years now. My career trajectory had kind of a pretty steady march. And so I was the deputy director for about the last year that I was there. Before that, I was the assistant director of ATF's field operations. So I oversaw all of ATF's law enforcement and regulatory operations across America and some other support functions related to that. And then on down through, I've held a lot of other jobs at ATF. But I will tell you, the best job I ever held at ATF was being a plain old agent. I loved working cases, and I'm sure we'll talk about some of those as we proceed. It was such a good job. And I tell people I didn't go into management at ATF because I thought it was going to be fun. It was not fun. I did it because I loved what ATF did. I really believed strongly in the mission. And there was a period of time early in my career where I thought I could do better than some of the people who were leading. And I got to a place where I said, you know what, you need to either put up or shut up. And so I raised my hand. I went into management. And like I said, no one was more surprised than me how it panned out. But I had just a fantastic career.
Wow. I mean, so that's part of that thing where, as far as promoting goes, sometimes it's better to be the asshole than to work for the asshole, right? Like we've talked about, I had an old mentor, FTO of mine, called me after I retired, and he said, "Hey, don't judge me. I'm thinking about testing for lieutenant." Right? Like, there's a point at which you're like, hey, don't be mad, but I'm thinking about giving up law enforcement and getting into law enforcement management, right? And you don't. I called our sergeants base coaches because they're in the uniform and they're on the field, but they're not typically actually playing the sport, right? So yeah, making the decision to get into the management side of things does take you out of the actual field nuts and bolts. So let's go back to the field nuts and bolts, and we want to start with our guests off by having them give us a little bit of background on how they ended up in law enforcement to begin with. And as I said at the beginning, I know my mic's a little weird, so I'm going to try and fix it while you're talking. So on the screen, you'll know that I'm adjusting some things on this end.
Well, I love talking about this stuff. That's why I was happy to be invited onto your show. I was born and raised in West Virginia. As long as I can remember ever wanting to be anything, I wanted to be a Fed. Growing up, I thought that meant I wanted to be an FBI agent. But what did I know? I was a dumb kid. My dad had been a deputy sheriff in our local county for a while. He left that and took a job at a chemical company, one of those things that provided better for the family. But he always had some aspirations of working in law enforcement too. And I remember him telling me one time, I was probably telling him, oh, I want to be an FBI agent or U.S. Marshal or something. And he said, I always wanted to work for the BATF. And he pronounced the B, that I would later come to know that ATF agents, that's like fingernails on a chalkboard to ATF agents when you pronounce that B. He said the BATF, and I don't think I'd even heard of the agency at the time. He said, you know, I always thought they went after the worst criminals. And so that was sort of in the back of my head. I got the proverbial foot in the door with IRS criminal investigations. And honestly, at the time, I didn't even know the IRS had a law enforcement component. Somebody that I knew said, hey, I know you're interested in federal law enforcement. They have an opening here. It was a person who was working at the IRS. I did some research. It actually has a very interesting history. So I applied. It was a paid internship program, but that was the foot in the door. And after I graduated college, I became an agent. I went through IRS Criminal Investigation Division's Academy, where you learn how to investigate a criminal tax evasion, money laundering, violations of the Bank Secrecy Act. It's white collar crime. It was actually really incredible training, but it was not the right place for me. And it's funny. So when I was working, this was in West Virginia, I was working there, and our office was located near the ATF office. And one day I see a couple of guys from the ATF office going out, and they're dressed like completely casual. And I said, oh, where are you guys going? They said, oh, we're going to buy a sawed-off shotgun in an undercover deal. And I was thinking, man, I'm going into the office and I'm just going to look at spreadsheets. This is not the right gig for me.
Right.
And so as luck would have it, I ended up meeting the guy that ran the ATF office in Charleston, West Virginia. And IRS, against my will, force transferred me to DC. It was fine. They asked me if I wanted to go. I said, no, I don't want to go to DC. I live here in West Virginia where things are very affordable. And they said, well, sorry, you must go.
The needs of the agency.
What's that?
I said the needs of the agency.
Which is something I would come to understand very well. And it turns out that was one of the best things that has ever happened to me in my life for a couple of reasons. One, because it showed me that there's a big world out there. And I got to live in a lot of places and see a lot of cool things. But two, when the agency, IRS, was transferring me away, the ATF supervisor approached me. And he said, I told your boss I would never try and poach you from IRS, but since they're sending you away, you seem like fair game to me. You should apply to ATF. And I did, and I got hired. So I tell people, look, hard work is really important, but it doesn't hurt to be lucky. And one of the luckiest things that ever happened to me was meeting Scott Pickett, the ATF supervisor in Charleston, West Virginia, when I was there. Anyways, I ended up getting hired by ATF about a year later, and that's where that's where my ATF career started in the late 90s.
That's awesome. And that's the proof that networking works when you meet people and you're a good person and you're able to talk to people and chat them up. I mean, that's how things happen. You meet people, you develop relationships, and that's amazing. Honestly, as you said something like when I was a kid, I wanted to be, a Fed, an agent. And I was like, man, ever since I saw that old movie, was it U.S. Marshals?
Mhm.
Tommy Lee Jones?
Yeah, I saw it with my dad. I was like, I want to be
Not
a
the
freaking
fugitive.
marshal.
Not the fugitive. Like the sequel, the crappier sequel, U.S. Marshals is what made you excited. Not the fugitive.
Well, it could have
Let's
been
get that clear.
It could have been both. I don't know. I was really young, so I
Okay.
don't remember the name. It could have been, but I was like, this is freaking awesome. I tried to be a marshal, and then I liked drugs, so I was like, I'll go DEA. Not like drugs that way. I liked dope cases and stuff. I was like, I want to do this, and but then I always thought of the ATF. I was like, that'd be really cool. And now you guys are the ATFE, right? Because the explosives section in it now. And
well, it's been the ATFE for quite some time. Yeah, you added the E like forever and a day ago.
That's right. In 2003, post 9/11, Homeland Security restructuring, ATF moved from the Treasury Department to the Department of Justice. And at that time, the agency's name was changed to the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives.
So why doesn't it say ATFE like NIS went to NCIS? Why doesn't they change it in the back of their raid jackets?
Because the E
it's not
is
as cool as ATF.
like the B has always been.
Right. That's awesome. I mean, wow. So what were the years that you were in? When did you start? And then when did you, well, obviously you retired in 2022?
Yeah. So I became a paid intern in 1995. I became an agent in 1997 with IRS CID. And then I came to ATF in 1999, summer of 1999, actually in Miami. So I had started in West Virginia. IRS moved me to DC. And then by the time ATF hired me, I had been working in DC for a year, and ATF offered me the job in Miami, Florida. I'd never been to Miami, Florida. But later and throughout my career, I would tell people, if I knew then what I know now, I would have taken that job anywhere in the world they asked me to go.
Right.
As it turns out, Miami was a great place to go. So
King Cowboys.
It was just such a neat place to work. So in 1999, I became a young ATF agent in Miami, Florida.
What was it like?
Well, I heard you mention that that you started at IRS, and you said it was interesting. And Chuck didn't mention it, so I wanted to at least mention that. Yeah, because the IRS are the ones that got Capone, right? So IRS has a long history of law enforcement. Not one I enjoy thoroughly, right? Necessarily.
Not at all, dude.
But at least they got Capone, right? But to a lot of people, the analogy I heard, I said, well, IRS agents got Capone. And somebody goes, yeah, but that's like saying, say what you want about Hitler, but at least he killed Hitler, right? So
I have joked with people. I said, look, moving from the IRS to the ATF, I went from the most widely hated agency to the most intensely hated agency. And I said that on to a radio guy once, and he said, what's next for you, Congress?
Right. I mean, it is interesting because the IRS and the ATF hold uniquely antagonistic or kind of, in some cases, villainous roles that the other three-letter agencies don't necessarily suffer from. Like DEA doesn't get the hate that the ATF does, right? Yeah. FBI, okay, the FBI is starting to experience a little bit of the ATF backlash, but we had an ATF agent, Chuck, remember on the show, we had an ATF agent on our show. He was at Ruby Ridge, right? I worked directly with two ATF agents. I'll maybe mention them later to Tom because I don't know that they'd want me to mention their names on this podcast. But one of which is quite famous for some of the stuff he did undercover with the ATF, and the other of which is just the most unassuming, good undercover street cop guy in the world. So how is that? How does that work for you guys, and how do you deal with it, and why? We understand the IRS. Nobody wants anybody touching their money, but where do you think the ATF has this special place from? Because when I was a kid, I remember seeing my dad did a joint operation with the ATF. He had an ATF hat, was a Department of the Treasury badge. So that should tell you, right? Department of the Treasury badge that said ATF. And I said, what's ATF? He said, alcohol, tobacco, and firearms. That's all they do. I'm like, there's an agency that only deals with alcohol, tobacco, and firearms.
It's badass. I've got to work with them.
That sounds cool, right? But then I realized that the alcohol, tobacco, and firearms might be the cool part. And then being the jerks that have to come in and tell people no might be the bad part. So do you think that's all it is?
So a couple of things. First, you mentioned IRS and ATF being related. They were more related than you might realize. Until 1972, the ATF was actually a division inside the IRS.
Wow.
ATF didn't become its own independent bureau until July 1st, 1972. Prior to that, it was a division in IRS, and it became pretty clear it didn't fit in there. And so that's when it broke out. The history of the agency is absolutely fascinating. It's one of the things I love talking about most. It does overlap with prohibition and, targeting Al Capone. You mentioned the IRS and them getting him for tax evasion, or sort of parallel operations focused on Capone and his a distribution network. And the forerunners of the ATF, the prohibition agents, were mostly targeting the illicit alcohol operations while the IRS was doing this tax evasion thing. Pretty fascinating history. But why ATF is maligned today is a complicated question. As I mentioned before, I think in a lot of ways it's because it's a convenient symbol of a divisive issue. Both sides want to point to it as representing something. Either gun control is too strong, or gun control has been kept too weak. But ATF's in an unenviable and difficult position of enforcing laws that it didn't write, that Congress wrote, and that it has to try to apply to the real world. And it's taken a lot of heat, and it hasn't even fared well in the courts in the recent past. But there are innovative people that look at the law and say, hey, I think I can invent something that works close to this. And ATF has to try and categorize it. And unfortunately, that regulatory activity is a thing that sometimes dominates some of the public discourse. If you are in a position to see the investigations ATF is working, and I was, you would be absolutely blown away. It's like crime fiction. The good work that ATF agents are doing every single day across the country is nothing short of phenomenal. They are some of the bravest people that I know, and they do incredibly important work on behalf of the American public. I really do wish that agency got the credit that I believe that it deserves. It has sometimes been its own worst enemy, and it shot itself in the foot on regulatory issues mostly. But we were talking back in the beginning about my progression through the career to the upper ranks of the agency. And I remember when I was still a plain old agent, I actually got to go to a conference, and I heard Attorney General John Ashcroft speak. You probably remember A.G. Ashcroft. And he gave a keynote speech at a Project Safe Neighborhoods event, or as an IACP conference or something. I don't think it'd be IACP. I don't think I was going to IACP that early in my career. And he made a comment that really stuck with me. He said, I realize that it is not the man with his boots on the desk that makes a difference. It's the man with his boots on the ground. And that really resonated with me. And I tried never to lose sight of that. Mm-hmm. And I really do think in a lot of ways, it's the reason I had a lot of support, even at the upper ranks in the agency, because I don't think I ever lost sight of what the agents did and what really mattered. You talked about being the a-hole making the decisions. Mm-hmm. And I try to be very direct and candid with the decisions I make. I'll tell you. So I worked at one point in a satellite office, like a 1 or 2 man office in rural southeastern Kentucky. And when I was an agent working there, I could not understand why ATF wouldn't send more resources. I mean, I was buried. There were more cases than I could possibly work. By the time I retired from ATF, I understood why the agency didn't send more resources there, right? It's an agency of finite resources. And so when you get that sort of broad level perspective, you can help other people try and understand. So I joked, right, every single step of my career progression, I would look back and realize, oh my God, there was so much stuff I didn't know. You know, right? I thought I was a high-speed, low-drag agent. Then I become a supervisor, and I realized, oh my God, I was a mess. But I'm a high-speed, low-drag supervisor, right? Until I become a middle manager, and I look back, I was a mess there too. And I used to joke, I was like, at what point in my career am I going to stop having this experience where I have to confront how much I don't know? How do I keep getting promoted with all these things I don't know? But what I realize is looking back, right, all of that broad experience gives you insight to draw from. But that's hard because when you're just the line agent and who you haven't looked in those positions, you may not realize that. And so I always try to be candid about it. And I would say to people, look, I am going to make decisions that some people won't like. I make the ones that I think are in the best interest of the agency and in public safety. No self-dealing. And I will say it to your face. So if you don't like it, at least you'll know who made the decision. I really tried to own everything that I ever did, which wasn't always fun, right? Those are hard decisions to make. But I look back on it now, and I'm super proud of everything that happened throughout my career. It was just a fantastic opportunity.
I bet. And when you're that close to something, you can't always have that 30,000-foot view and see every mistake that you're making. And I think the mistakes are what it causes you to grow, and it keeps you in that progression moving forward. You know, I always call it failing forward, where sometimes you fail, or you look at what you would consider failures, and you can improve upon them moving forward into the next steps. And I think that's probably what made you a really good you know, you're calling it in manager, but, you know, and moving forward in those supervisory ranks in the ATF. And it sounded like you were a copper's cop. I mean, that's the only way I know how to put it, a copper's cop. It seems like you understood all that and never lost sight of it.
Well, I tried not to. Look, we wanted aggressive, responsible policing. I was fortunate that I was in an era where that was the tone I tried to set. One time when I was the assistant special agent in charge, so second line supervisor, you know, you talked about being sort of removed from the streets, right? As an agent, you're in the streets. As a first line supervisor, you're still looking directly at the streets. At ASAC, you have to look around a guy to see the streets. And then special agent in charge, and even further, I mean, you're pretty removed from the streets. As ASAC in a field division, I circulated.
We called it executive law enforcement, by the way.
What's that?
Executive law. We called it executive law enforcement.
Yeah. So when I retired, I was in the senior executive service. It sounds so pompous to say, well, I was an executive. But
I mean, you're dealing with things at a corporate level at that point, right? It is not about one case. It is about many cases, right?
That's right. It's about policy and resource management. And, you know, so there were some really difficult things about trying to manage a national agency, right? To maintain consistency in policy and operations across a very diverse set of environments. So I heard you make reference to being in North Idaho, right? That's a place that's I have visited. It's a beautiful area, but trying to do law enforcement in North Idaho and South Florida don't look the same. And yet you've got ATF operating in both those places. And to be able to manage across that really was challenging. But when I was in ASAC, I distributed an anonymous survey to the field division. I convinced the SAC, who was my boss and who actually ran the division, hey, this would be a good idea. Let's get anonymous feedback and see what we can do better. And so we got all these surveys back, and I'm reading them. And, you know, agents had written things like, we shouldn't do this and this and this, and we shouldn't do that and that and that. And this should be. And I'm reading it, and my initial reaction is, well, they don't understand. And then I thought, well, that's not their fault. That's my fault. If they don't understand why we're doing something, I have failed them. And so I really tried not to lose sight of that, and to the extent that I could put it in terms that made sense. I always tried to explain not just what, but why. And I think that served me well. Anyways, those were lessons I learned and took with me throughout my career.
I would say that probably makes you a great supervisor, because I can't tell you how many times at a law enforcement level, like a patrol function level, we would have a new captain come in, and they would come into a roll call meeting or whatever in briefing. And then they would talk to us, and they'd be like, hey, if you guys have any ideas of what we could do to improve morale or things like that. And I rose my hand immediately, and people were like, dude, stop. That's a trick. Don't do it. And I did it, and I spoke up, and I was like, hey, this is what I think we can do. And this is my background, and I can help you. I can build a budget. I can do all this stuff for you. And I think it'd be great moving forward, and it'd really help officers. And that painted a big target on my back. But it seems like you did this in an anonymous function, which is really great, and actually took the feedback and utilized it for good, instead of finding out officers who are going to be outspoken, and punish them. And you took it to another level, to where you actually built upon that and created a better environment moving forward. And I think that just what makes you a really good supervisor. And you keep saying that you were looking down at, after you would move up, and you're like, man, I was so messed up there. No, so messed up. But you were hitting certain goals that other people weren't hitting, and certain things that probably won the hearts and minds over other agents, or, field agents and things like that. Because I got to tell you, on the ground level, working with someone who really takes into account the thoughts of the people on the ground, because let's face it, they're the backbone of the agency, right? These are the guys and gals who make miracles happen every single day, and make people in upper management look good. So why don't we take their ideas into consideration? Because every idea could be a good idea, if we just look at it. And originally you're like, no, they just don't understand. They're like, wait, hold on, let me take a step back, and then really look into it. And it seemed like you really took that into account, which is very rare, I think, to actually do that.
Well, so I mean, the point you made is a good one, and I have seen people do this. They ask for anonymous feedback, and then they get criticism. They're like, "Who said that?" And you're like, "Well, that defeats the whole point. This is why people won't give you honest feedback." In that same survey, so I collected them up, and I made it very clear. I mean, I was standing in front of the audience of about 100 employees in this division. I told you, this is anonymous. Fill it out, turn it back in. We're going to use this information. And at the end of the day, I collected them, and I looked through them. And one of the questions was, what's the one thing you would change about what's the one thing you would change in this division? And somebody wrote, the management. And so as I got up in front of the audience later in that day, I read that, and I started laughing. I said, well, look, I asked for candid feedback, and you gave it. An agent in that field division had been a friend of mine, and he approached me, and he said, I know who wrote that. And I went to him and said, why would you do something so childish? They're really asking for your feedback, and you're going to act like that. And I said, I do not want to know who wrote it. And to this day, I don't know who wrote that comment. And I don't even care, because look, you're never going to make everyone happy, but a lot of people wrote a real feedback. And like I said, it was an eye-opening moment for me. When I read comment after comment, I thought, they just don't understand how it works. I thought, well, then I am failing them. I will tell you, so I look at my career backwards, and it looks so well planned to me. The progression was natural. All of the spots, I felt like they built on each other. Some of those were just flukes, but some of them were because I was the beneficiary of guidance from people who had gone before me. And I have a mentor to this day. I revere the man. And I have tried to take that lesson and pay it back. And so when I could help people navigate career issues or see things, I tried to do that, because it really meant a lot to me. It made a big difference in how my career worked out.
Wow. Yeah. I mean,
Well, I'd like to find out some of the stories about the career, because we can what if some of these hypothetical executive law enforcement questions. But I mean, the guys I knew, working undercover, buying guns, right? Like one of the guys I worked with, I loved him to death. I was working dope, and he goes, "Dope and guns, baby, they go together. If you can get any intel whatsoever that there is a nexus to guns on your case, we will come and play. We will provide assets. We will provide resources. We will do all these things." And they always did. And I'll tell you what, on our show, Tom, is we always talk about the three-letter agencies, and there's that rivalry, right? The police department and the fire department have the same rivalry. The feds and the locals have the same rivalry. Hell, the county sheriff and the local PD and the state agencies have a rivalry, right? Marine Corps and the Navy hate each other but love each other, So
no,
there's
Marines and
that
Army.
element.
Marines and Army don't like each other. Marines and
But you
Navy, we
see,
love
like,
each other.
No, you don't. You love each other more than you love the Army, is what I was going to say. Is
Well,
like
we
you
we
tease
talk
each
shit to
other, but your
our
brother
brothers.
and sister, right? Your brother and sister, and the Army is your irritating cousin that comes over and pisses you off.
I mean,
right?
we do
But at
have
the same
ditties.
time,
I was gonna say we do have ditties
but at the
against
same
the
time,
Navy
you
when we run
stand
by
up for
them.
each other. You stand up for each other to everybody else, right?
Sure.
Despite the rivalry. Same thing in law enforcement. And I will say, there are a lot of rivalries. I was raised by a local cop who said the FBI stood for famous but incompetent, right? And so there was that natural tendency for that rivalry to exist. But at the same time, every single field agent I have ever worked with has been nails, right? They have been good cop, good agent, trained, dialed in, squared away, good people, wanting to do the right thing for the most part. But there are, people in any profession that don't represent it well in street cop level and in the federal, all the way up to the federal level. So I always say, hey, we can malign an agency, because I will malign the LAPD all day long. My dad worked there, and he told me never to work there. Chuck will talk about the Marine Corps, but don't you talk about the Marine Corps, right? Because it's not the Marines. Well, it's not the ATF agent, right? I know ATF agents. They are good, solid people. So you can malign an agency, but not malign an agent. And I think that's the big difference. Is a lot of times that's what gets lost, is the agents themselves. ICE agents right now are being maligned, and those are good agents that are doing their job.
Yeah.
And you may not like their job, but that is their job. Same thing with the ATF. So I just want to say that, Tom, our official stance on this show has always been, you can criticize an agency and you can have that rivalry and you can talk a bunch of shit, but at the end of the day, every single agent I've ever met has been a good cop.
So you asked about ATF and why it holds this sort of controversial position, being in North Idaho, and I think you mentioned Ruby Ridge earlier. That was one example of a sort of a high-profile issue that really caused a lot of controversy. But even it doesn't compare to Waco. And at ATF, in the courtyard of headquarters, there is a memorial. It has 4 gold stars on it, and it says the words "Never Forget." And we talked a little bit about the history of the agency. I loved talking about it, and so I would occasionally host tours through ATF's atrium. It's like a museum down there, and it's a fascinating history. But when we would go by, I would point out this memorial. And of course, the 4 stars represent the lives of the 4 agents that were killed at Waco.
Right.
And the words "never forget." I said, well, of course, the words "never forget" are a reference to those agents. Never forget those agents. It also means never forget the painful lessons that ATF learned from that. That dramatically changed the way it did operational planning and critical incident management. But I always added a third element. And I always thought that we should also never forget these are real people, just normal people that we are asking to do an incredible job. So, those agents have lost their lives, but they had families and they had regular lives that they lived. So to your point, I have met law enforcement officers, state, local, federal, international, all across the country, and almost to a person, they are good people. I have met some real turds. Occasionally you'll come across somebody that's just a criminal, but the vast majority of them are really good, and a lot of them are genuine heroes, right? Doing incredible things. I think we'll talk about Officer Down Memorial Page later, but I also subscribe to the officer.com daily newsletters. I tell people, if you want a reminder of everyday heroics, sign up for that. Every single day, you are going to see body cam footage of cops doing incredibly brave things. And so for all those reasons, I really hold law enforcement as a profession in very high regard. And like you, I have learned to judge people individually. And even when I have organizational concerns about specific agencies, it has never blinded me to the individual people that I have worked with there. A lot of good folks in a lot of places.
Absolutely. I mean, I don't think so. I don't think many people, do the Lord's work. I don't think very many agents or cops get into this profession with an ego complex to because they were bullied in high school or whatever, like a lot of people think. Most of them want to get in. I would say like 95% want to get into this profession to better their life and to better other people's lives. And the other 5% you have are ones who just want to get in and promote as high as they can, as fast as they can. And then you have the other ones who, sure, they could have been bullied, and that's the reason why they're going into for nefarious reasons. But majority of the people that I've ever come in contact with the same. They want to do the right thing. They want to go in to do the Lord's work. They want to help people because they want to serve a greater purpose than just themselves. They want to do what other people are afraid to do so that other people can feel safe in their homes at night, so they can go walking down the streets with their children and feel safe. And then when they pick up that call, they know to call 911, they know that will be answered by good, solid cops because they're going to be there and they're going to do the work. I think that's the majority of people. I think far too many people. I mean, right now it's just so divisive because I think the loudest minority is the ones who are screaming at the top of their lungs. And the majority is just like, I don't got time for this. I got a job. I'm doing, whatever. The minority is the one screaming and they're like, oh, I don't like this, I don't like that, but no one likes anyone in charge telling them what to do or enforcing laws. It just is what it is. None of us, I don't think, liked our principal in high school or anybody like that in an enforcement role who was enforcing rules and procedures upon us. We were like, that guy's stupid. Ugh. Well, no one likes the cops. No one likes it, but they're doing the Lord's work and they're doing the work that you are not willing to do, and they're the reason why you were able to say and speak the way that you do, and feel safe in your home. So,
yeah, I agree. I think most people are motivated by a desire to make the world a better place.
Yeah,
and not only that, I'm going to tell you right now, there's a difference between agreeing with it and agreeing to abide by it, right? And so as a people, I think a lot of times we get those two confused where, hey, I'll give you a perfect example. As a street cop, I wrote tickets to people who were not wearing their seatbelt during the click it or ticket grant period where I could go work an overtime shift. And that overtime shift was completely funded and paid for by this Department of Transportation grant, where I went out and my sole mission in life was to write seatbelt tickets for this traffic safety campaign, right? You understand, Chuck? Did you ever have this stuff?
Yeah. I mean, we had
traffic safety campaigns. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So I did work time and a half overtime and get paid to go out and write seatbelt tickets. However, I am out of uniform and I am on my own time now, and I have my own podcast, and I can tell you that seatbelt laws are stupid. And I, with the exception of children under a certain age, don't think they should be required. I think that at some point you're a grown-ass person, and if you want to go through the windshield, that's on you. I don't like it. I don't agree with it, and I think you should wear a seatbelt as a safety precaution, but I don't necessarily think that it's something the police should get involved in with anything other than minors. However, that is not the opinion that I ever expressed in uniform, because when I was in uniform, I didn't have an opinion. I agreed to abide by what the current law was. So just because someone is doing their job doesn't mean they agree with the policy or the law. It just means that they have agreed to abide by it until it changes, right? And I think people have this whole idea of, if I don't like the law, I just don't have to follow it.
Yeah,
and I'm the libertarianist guy you'll ever meet, right? I want people to understand there's a fundamental difference between agreeing to do your job, whether you agree or disagree personally, versus being someone who is bought and paid for in ideological lockstep with what the management says to do, right? Just because the cashier at Starbucks has to ask your pronouns because that's Starbucks policy, doesn't mean that person doesn't think it's stupid to ask that question.
So I used to say this a lot. I said it to myself, and I reminded other people of it too. Every single day, I reminded myself I was not self-employed, right? This isn't Tom Chittum's agency. I wasn't elected to Congress. I didn't pass these laws. And so you can't be subversive. And, you asked about why ATF is so maligned. I did a lot of media interviews when I was at ATF. And I'd get asked questions. Should the law be this? Should the law be that? I say, it's not my place to say what the law should be. You should be taking that up with Congress. It is my role to enforce the laws that they write. And so that's always one of those difficult things. And frankly, I retired in the pay period I became eligible because I disagreed with some of the policies that were there, but I wasn't going to be subversive to them while I was carrying out my mission. But when I was free to leave, I did. You mentioned about seatbelt laws. And I was going to say one last thing about police leadership before we moved on, because I do have some war stories to tell. Police leadership is evolving in good ways, I think, although the last 5 or so years have not been comfortable ones for policing as a profession. I really do think it has evolved. I think that police leaders understand the value of transparency. I think you're seeing body-worn camera footage getting pushed out much faster. And when it gets pushed out with context, I've seen that done very effectively. Look here in this freeze frame. What our officer saw was a person who was armed. I think that helps. I think there's still a pretty large silent majority that believes in law enforcement and supports it. And I think the pendulum has swung back. But as to seatbelt laws, so there's another change afoot in policing, and it kind of surprises me it's taken as long as it has, because when I went to grad school 20 years ago, we were talking about it, but this is a push towards evidence-based policing. So the question is, does writing those seatbelt tickets help reduce traffic fatalities? If it does, maybe it's a good policy. But let's say you're ticketing people in an otherwise safe neighborhood where you're eroding support for law enforcement. People say, yeah, okay, you got me. But man, I just wish my cops were doing something more valuable with their time. And so you can measure not only does the seatbelt ticket reduce fatalities, but what's the impact on public support for law enforcement? And I really do think using information like that, being thoughtful about the policies you apply, can make policing better and can build up the strong community support that the profession depends on.
I love that you said that. I was going to say this real quick. I love that you said that, because I agree 100%, because there are a lot of times you be in a safe neighborhood and It's not always the old lady walking across the street to the Lavenderia that you're going to give a ticket to for jaywalking. She's going to do her laundry. Are you going to make her a police supporter? No, you're going to piss her off, and she's not going to want to talk to you when some shit goes down. Same thing in a safe neighborhood. If you have someone being a dumbass, what I used to do is I would get on the PA system. I would basically make them a spectacle for the whole neighborhood to hear, and I would do it for probably about 5 minutes, and I would just talk to them through the PA system, and not necessarily belittling them, but showing them what they just did, what they did, how it was wrong, how they could injure young children out, how they just passed a stop sign, they didn't even stop, how they're not wearing a seatbelt, how they're talking on their phone, how they're doing all these things. And yeah, I could have wrote them for everything, right? But I feel like embarrassing them in front of God and everybody and doing that, I feel like it built better police relationship with the community that you're enforcing in, as well as that driver, because they're like, yeah, he berated me and made me feel stupid. But at the same time, I don't have a $500 ticket or $1,000 ticket that I'm going to have to pay, because I would start listing off all the fines that they did. And then every single time, shit you not, people would come out of their homes, or they'd be walking their dogs, and they'd be like, officer, wave me down. I'm like, yes, how can I help you? And they would be like, that was awesome. That was the best thing I've ever seen in my life. Keep doing that. That's the stuff we need. That's the type of police. I'm like, you got it. And that's what I would do. And I love to do it. And because I hated writing tickets. And I feel like that worked 10 times better. And it built better relationships, not only with the community, but with the person that you just did that to, because it was an informal, informational period of instruction. I don't know. That's my 2 cents on it.
Well, we all love it when somebody's being a jerk in the car, and all of a sudden, right, karma catches up to them, and there was a cop right there, and they light them up, and you're like, yes, thank goodness, because I think most of us follow the rules and want to participate in society. I will tell you. So after ATF, I went to work for a company now called Sound Thinking. At the time, it was called Shot Spotter. And Bill Bratton, the former commissioner of NYPD and Boston PD and chief LAPD, was a board member there. And even as a young kid, I had read some of his books.
The chief of LA.
Yeah, he's such a smart guy. And if you read his books, I don't know if it's his latest one. It's the last one I read, was The Profession. It was really.
By the way, did my microphone sound better or worse? I'm sorry.
Sounds better now.
You sound okay to
better?
me.
Okay. So yeah, I'm sorry. Chief Bratton, Bill Bratton, and his book. You go ahead.
So he talks a lot about the value of policing public order, right? I mean, we don't want to get shot. That's the violent crime rate. But we also feel unsafe when we see disorder, and policing that makes a big difference. And so, you were talking about reassuring the community. I do believe that public safety is co-produced by law enforcement and the community at large. Police, I think, realize and have been doing a better job of engaging the community in a way that reassures them and does engender support. I think those are really positive developments for the profession. I look forward to seeing where it goes in the coming years.
So I have a couple of anecdotal war stories, I think, as we get into war stories, because that's ultimately, as we run out of time, this is where we want to take it. I have some interesting anecdotal evidence that we can all talk about based on your experiences, Tom, and you can share your stories as well. That mindsets, like to your point, are changing and evolving much the way the evidence-based policing idea, right, is evolving. The broken windows theories and all these different law enforcement concepts. But I will tell you a couple of practical things that one, Chuck, I think I could share this story. I don't think I've ever shared this story, because it was one of those things that you have to make sure, not quite statute of limitations, but you just don't want to get anybody in trouble. And I remember, and I pulled over, it was we were doing a DUI checkpoint. And there was DUI checkpoint down the road, and I'm working patrol in the area. And at one point,
there was a car in the area that maybe rolled the stop sign, California rule on a stop sign. And I pulled it over and I walk up and I open the door, or roll down the window, take the guy's license. It is a man, distinguished man in his late 50s, early 60s. His wife, they're obviously dressed up, and they're in the car, and they're very nice people, very polite. And I said, may I see your driver's license, registration, insurance? He gets it out. He looks at me and he starts to speak. And I said, sir, you know what? I'm going to have you switch places with your wife real quick. And he starts talking. He goes, I said, sir, do me a favor. Before you say anything or do anything, and before I have to do anything I don't want to do, I need you to switch places with your wife real quick. And he and his wife she started hitting him. She goes, Harold, just switch places with me. And so they switched places. And then I said, ma'am, where are you coming from? She says, my husband and I are on our way home from a date. And I said, aha. And I said, well, the reason I pulled you over is that you failed to come to a complete stop at the stop sign back there. And when you get home, I suggest you tell your husband that if he's going to have the extra glass of wine at dinner, that he go ahead and let you drive home. And she was like, thank you, sir. Now, he was not drunk. He was not intoxicated. He was not impaired, right? I did not pull him over for being impaired. However, if he had spoken, if he had given me that thing I knew I was going to find, then I was going to have to do things that I didn't want to have to do. And so did I bend the law? Yeah, well, I damn near broke it off, right? I could see a world where doing that on the same night as a DUI checkpoint would get Mothers Against Drunk Driving at the steps of City Hall, but that was community policing. And I've told that story to people and they're like, man, that's cool, right? And I say, yeah, my dad's generation, they took the keys and they threw it into the field. And they said, by the time you find your keys, you'll be sober enough to drive, right? So I had a conversation about, of all things, domestic violence with several different women over the last couple of years, our generation, our age, growing up post OJ, mandatory arrest laws, all these things that we as law enforcement know. And we start to talk about the unintended consequences of mandatory arrest laws on women of lower income, right? And they're shocked when, as a cop, I'm like, yeah, it disproportionately affects women who are from a lower income, or, and I start talking about statistically how what women learn is, I'm going to lose out on a week's worth of pay. We're still going to have to pay the bail. We're still going to have to pay the lawyer fees. I'm not going to leave him. And ultimately, when he gets out of jail, he's going to come home and scream at me and yell at me for, this is what happens when you call the cops. Now we're in debt. And he might hit her again. And the only lesson she learned was, don't call the fucking cops. Right? And they're shocked when I say all this. And I say, you know what my dad's generation did? And they said, what? And I said, my dad's generation was the generation that said, hey, ma'am, if you don't want to press charges, there's nothing I can do. And so the women would be like, I don't want to press charges. I just want him to stop hitting me. And they'd say, all right, hold on. And then they'd say, sir, can you step outside for a second? And then when the guy stepped outside, they'd lump him up real good and say, listen up, motherfucker. If you touch your wife again, I'm going to come back and give it to you twice as hard. And then they'd send him back inside with his tail tucked between his legs, and life would go about its business. And eventually he'd learn that the next time he touched her, the cops were going to come out and kick his ass even harder. To a woman, regardless of age or race or socioeconomic or political background, they've all said, yeah, that's a much better way to go. And I'm like, well, I don't know what to tell you. That's what they used to do, and then they took it away. So the ideas about what is effective, what is evidence-based, what's actually going to work is even in the public's consciousness becoming this, okay, we've seen what these strict, stringent boxes that you put cops in do. So we're ready to talk about something that actually is more effective, right? Did you see that kind of stuff?
Yeah, so I think, and I agree with you, some informal solutions can be so much better, but you point to an issue that we have overly formalized a lot of this, and that carries with it its own connotations. We give discretion to individual cops, and some of them abuse it. And so then we try and create policies to limit that, but it ties hands in other ways. These are very complicated issues because society is complex and humans are complex. I do think that there will be a move towards more informal resolutions. I mean, I think about the first time I got stopped by a cop. I was speeding out my road and I didn't see him. And honestly, I didn't know what the speed limit was there. And he pulls me over and he tells me, come back here and get my cruiser. We get a cruiser. He's looking at my driver's license and he says, is your dad Butch Chittum? And I said, my dad is Butch Chittum. He said, well, you go home and you tell him I pulled you over for speeding and drive slower next time. And so I did exactly that. And it really had an effect on me. I mean, that guy could have written me a ticket and caused me a lot of grief, but he didn't. And part of it's because I was growing up. It was a different time and it was a small town. But I do think informal resolutions can often be effective. With, again, making sure that, we don't go so far as to violate people's rights in another way, which I have seen that too. And I will tell you, sometimes it only takes a couple bad cops to give all of us a bad name.
Ooh, nobody hates bad cops more than good cops.
I have arrested police officers, and I agree with you 100%. So let's talk about some more stories. We'll run out of time.
Yeah.
I will tell you, you mentioned earlier some guys that got into policing and then immediately shot up into management. And I might have been one of those guys, except circumstances came along that kept me in the field for 10 years as a plain old agent. And I am so grateful for it. Remember, again, I said, looking back, I now realize how important these things were. But when I had been an agent for 3 years and I thought I knew it all, I didn't know how important 10 years would be. Agents would tell you, I don't think anyone should go into management before they've been an agent for 10 years. I'm like, look, I've been here 3 years. That guy's been here 20 years. Which one of us would you rather be your boss? Right, me, because that guy's an idiot. And so time alone isn't the factor, but it does matter. And so I worked cases as an agent in Miami and then as an agent in rural Kentucky. And I had so many good ones. I once got hired to kill a guy. I worked undercover a fair amount. That's kind of like core for ATF. So every single ATF agent learns how to work undercover. It's kind of central to what the agency does. Unlike like at IRS, only a small cadre of agents are trained to do undercover at all. At ATF, it's just everyone learns how to do it. But ATF does keep a pool of advanced undercover agents. And I always, I admired those guys and I wanted to be one of them. And so I kept applying for this program, kept applying. I didn't get in. Eventually I got in. In retrospect, I think they let me in because they knew one day I might be in charge of some things. And so they were really just trying to throw me a bone. I really do admire the bravery of undercover agents. And so in ATF, getting to work a murder for hire was a sort of rite of passage. I got to do one of those. I bought a lot of drugs. I bought a lot of guns. I had a lot of fun with that. But I will tell you, not long after I got to Eastern Kentucky, very rural Eastern Kentucky, I get a call from the state police. Hey, we just came across a moonshine still. Do you want to come down here? I said, yeah, I'll be right there. So I zip down there and I show up and they've got a couple of guys sitting there in handcuffs. They were doing marijuana eradication, state police, and they fly in helicopters. They rappel down, they cut these marijuana fields they find out in the woods, and then they hike out. And as they hiked out, they passed this moonshine still. And so they're sitting there and the moonshine still is cooking. And they say, are you going to arrest these guys federally? And I said, no, I'm here to get my picture taken with the moonshine still. What kind of ATF agent comes to Eastern Kentucky and never gets to see a moonshine still? You should give these guys an award for not cooking meth, which is a much bigger problem than moonshine in this
Right.
area. So that was always one of my favorite Eastern Kentucky experiences. You know, I worked firearms trafficking cases. I really enjoyed that.
That's
I was
amazing.
always a gun guy. You know, ATF, you talked about the explosives. So for people who don't know, about 80% of ATF's law enforcement focus is on firearms enforcement. And then the other 20% is mostly explosives. And then a smaller portion, maybe 3% of that 20% is like arson. And then a sliver of 1% is alcohol and tobacco. It's half the agency's name, but less than 1% of its mission.
Mm-hmm.
And I was always a gun guy. The explosive stuff, it made me a little bit nervous. There are guys in the agency that sort of naturally gravitate towards that. So you're talking about going to the marshals or DEA. Like ATF, you really could sort of guide your own career. The best thing about my career going into management was I got to see work being done by so many people. And, you know, you joked about what FBI stands for. I've heard that too. But I like to think that ATF could stand for America's toughest feds. And I really do believe that about the agency. Those guys and gals are putting themselves in harm's way, which means agents are getting shot and getting into shootings a lot. And so the time that I was the assistant director and later the deputy director, I called every single agent that got into a shooting. You know, sometimes a couple of days after, right, the first day or so, right, there's a lot. And I would chat with them. Hey, how are you feeling? How are you sleeping? And not long ago, in the last year, and I've been retired for 3 years, an agent walked up to me at a function. He says, hey, I'm such and such, and you called me after I got in my shooting. I was like, oh, wow, it's great to meet you in person, right? Agency's got 2,500 agents. I didn't know them all personally. And so I think people always appreciated that. But for me, I told them, I appreciate you, right? We asked you to do a really hard, dangerous job, and you're putting yourself out there. That's hard on you. That's hard on your family. That's the reason those guys were my heroes.
That's awesome. And I like that you do that that you did that, because when I got into my shooting, I had my captain, the chief of police doesn't call you down and go, hey, I heard you got into a shooting. Are you okay? They don't care. They just, it is what it is. The captain will reach out to you. I had both my captains reach out to me, and both of them were like, how are you doing? I was like, not great. I mean, I just shot someone. I mean, like, he shot at me, I shot at them. I put them down. I mean, how do you expect me to feel? And they're like, okay, cool. When are you coming back to work? And I was like, I'm taking my 2 weeks. Why would you ask me that? What is the purpose behind that? And so I like that you took the time out of your busy schedule as being, you know, a director to reach out and to the people on the ground and be like, hey, are you doing good? Are you okay? Do you need anything? That, because that speaks volumes, especially when you're dealing with a situation like that, because it's very sensitive. I mean, you don't know what the officers or agents are feeling. You don't know what's going through them. That's a life and death situation that they just lived through, and they had everything flash before their eyes, and they had to act within a second that they're going to be judged on, and it's going to be broken down for the next however long the case goes on. You know what I mean? So like that is amazing. Good job. That's awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I write on LinkedIn a lot. I am also a law professor. I love reading the law and writing about the law. And I wrote a post today, and I made reference to the fact that gun crime feels like a very modern issue to us, right? Sometimes it dominates the headlines. But in the Second Amendment course I teach, the oldest case we cover is more than 200 years old. When you start looking at the law and history, what you see is crimes committed with guns are nothing new. But in that same post, I made a reference to a thing a colleague of mine at ATF used to say. He trained all of ATF's tactical medics. And he said, we've been dealing with gunshot wounds for about 500 years. That's about how long guns have been invented and people have been getting shot with them, right? So we understand the physical trauma that guns can cause, and we can treat that. But what we're only now starting to understand is the emotional trauma that comes from being in a shooting, being a witness to a shooting, being shot. And so I try to be sensitive to that stuff. You know, your sleep cycles are terribly disrupted. You really have this anxiety about what's going to come next. And so I always call just to say, I want you to know how much I appreciate you and the job that you're doing for us, and to make sure you're getting the resources that you need. What I found was ATF was really good about taking care of its own people. It had a really fantastic peer support program. And to an agent, they said, look, everyone has been awesome. But occasionally they would say, I wish we would do this or that. And please keep that in mind. So they were always really gratifying calls for me. I hope that they were appreciated. But as much as anything, I did it because I wanted to express my gratitude.
Wow. I mean, I bet you they were appreciated. I can tell you that, because all I wanted was someone to reach out and be like, "Hey, are you good?" And the ones that did I appreciated it.
Yeah, I think so. I always got good feedback, but here's the other thing too. When you do go into the executive ranks of an agency, you have to be comfortable with silence, because you will say something or you will send out an email and think, oh, I have written law enforcement gold. This is wisdom here. Send it out. Crickets, right? Nobody wants to email you back. You just have to be comfortable with knowing people talk behind your back. You hope that they say good things about you. I think that they did. Like I said, I loved it. I look back on my whole life, honestly, and I just can't believe how lucky I've been.
That's very cool. I did enjoy, like I said, I enjoyed working with the ATF agents that I worked with. I always thought the fact that it's kind of like the Marine Corps, everyone's a rifleman, right? And in the ATF, everybody's an undercover cop. It just goes part and parcel with it, and you have a good time, and you guys take care of each other.
Yeah, I mean, I still today, ATF agents are some of my best friends.
So there you go. Chuck, does our guest have a dedication, or do we have the dedication?
No, our guest has dedication. He has dedication and something to say about Officer Down Memorial page.
So, awesome. A couple of things. One, so I worked at ATF headquarters for a very long time. And when you enter into the building, off to the right is ATF's memorial wall. Both line of duty deaths and hostile action deaths. And there are a lot of names on that wall. And every single day I would glance over it. First of all, it's a really fantastic memorial, but I really did try to keep my eye on the fact that, hey, we're asking people to do very dangerous things. Let's not lose sight of that. There are a lot of ATF agents who have given their lives in service. So I always admired that. And I became aware of the Officer Down Memorial page through that. I got the app, and I tell people you should get the app. You should put it on your phone. You should turn on notifications so that every single time somebody is killed in the line of duty, you can read about it. You can see the sacrifices that people are making. So after I retired from ATF, I went to work for the company now called Sound Thinking. And the company raised some money and donated it to ODMP. And so we had an event to present that check to ODMP. And when I found out about it, I said, wow, I'm a really big fan. I would love to participate in it. So I got to meet the folks behind ODMP. And I think the work that they're doing is really fantastic. The dedication I have is not for somebody who died in the line of duty. And so maybe there's somebody that you would like to mention there. But very recently, an old ATF agent that I had known for a very long time passed away, natural causes. His name was Mike Angel. And I met Mike when I was a young agent. He had already retired from the agency. He was working background investigations. He was a salt of the earth guy, lived in London, Kentucky, developed a reputation for building antique furniture after he retired from ATF. But Mike loved the agency, and he was a coordinator of retiree luncheons. And so when I first started working in law enforcement, I would look around the table. I was often the youngest guy there. And then over the course of my career, that changed. And I would look around the room, and sometimes I was the oldest guy there. And then when I retired young, and I went to some of these retiree events, and all of a sudden I was the youngest guy again, right? But there were guys there in their 70s and 80s who were working cases long before I was born. And the reason that I mention Mike now is because I think he is symbolic of an issue. Like you guys, after you leave the profession, you can never fully leave the profession. And so it is worth remembering those that made it out alive, but never quite gave up their connection to it. So I really loved Mike. He was that's Mike. He was such a great guy. Really captured the essence of what I felt about being an ATF agent and a person. As Mike's health was failing near the end, I talked to him and I said, Mike, you have handled this with such grace. You are an inspiration to me. And that is true. And for that reason, I just wanted to mention Mike on this podcast.
I can think of no better reason to dedicate an episode to somebody. And so, no, there is absolutely nothing more that we would need to say other than rest easy, brother. We got it from here, because I will tell you one of my favorite stories that my dad used to tell me, Chuck. I don't know if this tradition still exists. Maybe you can speak to it. But in my dad's era of policing, you'd go to roll call. You'd have your hat, because back then there was a requirement that if you were outside the car, you were wearing a hat. And so you'd have your hat, you'd have your clipboard and your briefcase and all your stuff. And they'd go through the briefing, and eventually they'd get to police officers who had passed away, retired police officers who had passed away. And inevitably they'd read, so-and-so, retired, such and such, passed away, date of assignment X, end of watch X, passed away X. And if the date of retirement, the years between your retirement and your death were greater than your years of service on the department, so you served 20 years on the department and you lived 30 years after that, they gave you a standing ovation because you took more money than you put in, right? It was like you got them, right? So there's that respect for the old guard of, like, you made it out, you found the condo in Redondo, you had a prize beyond law enforcement, but you never forgot the guys, right?
Right.
So
a few things have changed since then. No one really brings their covers to roll call anymore, and they pretty much stay in your locker for when you have to wear your Class A's. You don't need to go out with that.
Yeah,
anymore.
well,
my dad
also used to have to call in to find out if you were allowed to wear short sleeves or long sleeves.
Yeah, a lot of customs and courtesies have changed. I have worked with some watch commanders who would do that, who would have a roll call, and at the end of roll call would talk about those who have passed away, fallen officers from the LAPD who've passed away. And I did see that a few times, but it was generally with the older watch commanders who would come in and who remembered that standing tradition from a while back. But I do have to say, I mean, that should go back to it, but I have seen it fall by the wayside because you have too many people who are being promoted on that department who do not know how to even be a cop in the first place, and they're getting promoted into a position and they don't have customs and courtesies, they don't have tradition. They're more of the business guy who wants to come in and just promote, and they do the minimal time on patrol, which is you have to do 3 years before you can promote and to move into a unit. They do the most minimal time, and then they just go. I mean, I have some classmates that did that. And I don't agree with it at all. I think you should do at least 10 years in patrol, or at least in a patrol style function that works with patrol. So I say 10 years when you said 10 years, Tom. I mean, that is a solid benchmark for a good cop. And that's probably why you never lost sight of the main mission and the boots on the ground. And I think that's important and imperative. I think 5 years in patrol is the minimum that you should be able to do. I don't think it should be 3. I think it should be 5, because at 5 years, you have a great understanding of, I know my job. I know what I'm doing. I'm not afraid of any call. I'll go to any call. Don't care. I can train people up on it. And it could have hit earlier than that, but 5 years should be the benchmark for everybody. Because if you don't know what you're doing in 5 years, you shouldn't be promoted into anything higher than patrol. I mean, that's just me. That's the old school thinking of me. I was brought up a little bit more old school than most cops, and I don't know. There's a lot to that, but that's just my thought on it. It's my 2 cents. But I just want to say, Tom, thank you so much for coming on today. It was a pleasure.
Oh, no problem. I'm always here. Oh wait, sorry.
It was a pleasure. I think that I think you're really hard on yourself, and it makes you super humble, and I think that that's a good thing. Don't ever lose that. I think that you were good in that position, and you were meant for that position, and second guessing yourself as you were going along was probably what made you great at that position. And I want to say thank you all today for tuning in. If you enjoyed today's episode, make sure to follow us on Instagram at war_stories_official and our Facebook at War Stories Podcast. If you're already following us, we really appreciate it if you could share our posts and help spread the word. You can also check us out in the link in our bio on both platforms to find all of our social media, our media links, and our website. Our podcast is available on all major.
You don't even have to give out that we're going to change them all. Just
okay. This is all going to change. If you want to go to our website right now, it's still www.warstoriesofficial.com. It is what it is. But what has not changed, if you want to be featured on the show and you want to come onto the show, you can always reach out to our producer, Dylan. Go to linkedin.com/War Stories Podcast, and you can reach him there. You can also go to booking.warstories@gmail.com. That's less checked. I check it. I just got a new phone. I have to re-sign in, so please bear with me. But if you want to be featured on the show,
dude, by the time this airs, that won't matter at
all. Go to linkedin.com /War Stories Podcast to share your stuff, and you can be featured on the show. We're always looking for law enforcement, veterans, correction officers, dispatchers, firefighters, medics, ER docs, ER nurses to feature on the show. You guys all have interesting stories, and we want to hear them. Shit, I want to hear about those ER docs and ER nurses who give IOs to asshole patients because they were dicks to the cop and hit one of them. Those are great stories, and they're awesome to watch and happen in real life. You can also find us on TikTok at www.tiktok.com/War Stories.
All this stuff is changing.
That's all going to change. So thank you for all the support. Stay safe out there.
So now, Tom, thank you. We want I would be remiss, and I got to do the boys a solid because I'm a street cop at heart. So I have to ask the hard-hitting question, right? When people make dog jokes, does it hurt your feelings?
You know what? I was an ATF agent long enough to know you should never read the comments at the bottom of news stories.
There you go. And then the other thing I wanted, so I asked Tom that question. So now I'm going to remind the listeners, I'm going to do Tom solid, and I'm going to tell you, right, that speaking from being up here in North Idaho, if you really want to get technical, the dog in North Idaho was not the ATF's fault. Okay, let's just be real about that. I just want to point that out because the ATF gets a lot of crap. But if you really look at how that situation went down, and this comes from the place of having interviewed a man who was there. When you look at the people that actually put their names on something and sent it down range, and that dog, the ATF's name isn't on the dog. So
right.
Yeah, that was a pretty terrible incident. So I have always been a bit of a student of history, and I read everything I could find about ATF and even, some very critical things of it. And the good thing for me is it gave me a factual basis to understand these things. And you're right. I mean, Ruby Ridge was a terrible incident. You look back on it now, and it wasn't managed very well. There were a lot of mistakes made at Waco too. If you don't look at critical incidents like that in a critical way and learn lessons from them, you are doing all of us a disservice. And I will tell you, ATF, there's actually been some pretty good documentaries. Bill Buford, who is at the Waco incident, he's the guy that was driven out on the hood of a vehicle wrapped in a blanket. He was featured pretty prominently in a documentary on Netflix. That guy was passionate about the agency and its mission. As I mentioned, he was my class coordinator when I came through the academy. And even years later, they gave a presentation to new ATF agents on that incident, right? I mean, the agency takes to heart the saying, never forget. And I think that that's true of all of law enforcement. This is a human endeavor. We are going to make mistakes, but the biggest mistake would be not learning from those.
Right. And at some point, law enforcement's like sausage. Don't watch how it's done. Just enjoy it. All right.
Well, I
well,
appreciate you guys having me on.
Yeah, no problem. We appreciate it. And until our next episode, come home with your shield or on.